this is Celine from Blue Calla Patterns. Welcome to video 2 for the Buttercup Bucket Bag. In this video we're going to do the exterior assembly of our bag. The pieces that you're going to need for this video are your 2 exterior main body pieces, and if you followed the instructions in the first video you should have one of the main body pieces will have this cutout shape from the fusible fleece on the wrong side. You'll also need your top band exterior pieces, and if you've used fabric, I've used vinyl, but if you've used fabric, they should both have fusible woven interfacing on the wrong side and fusible fleece. You'll need your exterior slip pocket pieces. I used the same fabric for exterior and lining. And they both should have the fusible woven interfacing on the wrong side, and I used a medium weight woven interfacing, which is a little bit thicker, quite a bit thicker actually, than the lightweight. If you've used lightweight, you should also have fusible fleece on the wrong side of one of the slip pocket pieces. You're also going to need your piece of zipper for the exterior zipper pocket. Now, I'm just going to remind myself here, there's 2 different sizes. So if you're using a pre-made zipper, it'll be a 9-inch pre-made handbag size zipper, so a 4.5 or a number 5 zipper. Or if you're using zipper tape like me, you'll want 12 inches of zipper tape. You'll also want the exterior zipper facing piece, and I usually make that match this exterior fabric here, fusible woven interfacing on the wrong side. Your 2 exterior zipper pocket lining pieces, both of them interfaced. Prepared your exterior bottom piece, so it should have the foam on the wrong side. The foam basted to the wrong side. And on the right side here, you'll see I have my purse feet, and I basted the foam with a zigzag stitch all the way around. And then you will also need your slip pocket flap pieces. So again, mine is a little bit different. I'm not using fabric for this slip pocket flap. I've decided to use vinyl for both the exterior and the lining, so I don't have interfacing. But if you're using fabric, you should have fusible woven interfacing on the wrong side of both, and then fusible fleece on one of these pieces. Because I can't use a fusible interfacing on vinyl, or rather I just don't like fusing interfacing to it, I'm just going to use a piece of stiff stuff sew-in interfacing, which I'm going to insert in between the layers, and you'll be able to see how I do that a bit later. And the last thing you'll need is both 1.5 inch rectangle rings and your rectangle ring strap pieces. Okay, so to start, I'm just going to set most of these pieces aside. What I really want right now is just the exterior slip pocket pieces, and I want the exterior slip pocket pattern piece. So you'll see there's like a little corner here. That's what we're going to use as a guide to draw our dart lines at the corners. So you're just going to cut out that little triangle. Like so. And then we're just going to use this as a guide to draw our dart lines on the wrong side of our exterior slip pocket pieces. So you're going to be doing this 4 times because there's 4 darts to sew. And yes, I just use a regular pen because this isn't going to show, or nobody's going to see these marks. Now these lines are what we're going to use to create the darts at each of the 4 corners of our exterior slip pocket pieces. Now, I know there's many different ways to do this. Different pattern designers will use different methods. I've used different methods myself. The clematis is done a different way. But for this one, all I'm going to do, and I forgot my clips. So what you're going to do, and hopefully you can see this clearly, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pinch the fabric so that it is right sides together. And then I'm going to line up these ends of the line so they are aligned. And then fold in half this way. And use a clip to hold it in place. Then I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to start sewing from the inside corner here, back stitch, and sew all the way to the outer edge, following the line, and make sure that I back stitch again. And if you've lined up your lines properly here, you're going to be sewing along the line on both sides. And then you're going to repeat that for the other 3 corners of your exterior slip pocket pieces. Okay, so the 4 darts have been sewn, all 4 of them. Now there's 2 things you can do. You can maybe trim a little bit and then press this open, but they're such small darts that I actually just press them flat. So you can do whatever you prefer. Okay, I'm going to do that for all 4 of them. It's probably a tiny bit easier if you just trim them and then press the seams open, but it's up to you. You can actually even just leave them like that. It really won't make that much of a difference. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to pin or clip these 2 pieces right sides together. I'm just going to use clips. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this for now because I won't need it. And when you're clipping the darts, you just want to make sure that those dart seams are perfectly aligned. So I'll show you how I do that. So I just line up those seams and I clip. And I do the same thing for the second one. And then I clip the rest of the edges. Now when we're sewing these 2 pieces together, you're going to leave these two straight edges at the top here. You're going to leave those unsewn. So you're first going to sew this curved edge and make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so this is what it looks like once you've sewn the top edge. Now we're going to sew the lower edge. Now we're going to need to leave an opening at the bottom to turn the pocket. But there's a little trick that I use when I'm turning through an edge like this that then needs to be sewn shut. There's a little way to make it so that you're more precise with that edge when you're closing it up. So what you're going to do is you're going to start sewing here, back stitch, sew all along the side and then come down to the bottom edge. Then you're going to stop right about here, about 2 inches away from the dart, and you're going to back stitch. Then you're going to increase your stitch length to a basting stitch. So whatever the maximum stitch length your machine is capable of, mine goes up to, I believe it's 6. So I increase to 6 and then I sew with a 6-inch stitch length, just where I want to leave an opening to turn the pocket piece. And then I stop again about 2 inches from that corner dart here, and I back stitch. I change my stitch length to my regular stitch length, which is 3, and then I finish sewing up until this corner and then I back stitch. So go ahead and sew exactly this, the bottom edge exactly this way, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so I've sewn this outer edge and I'm going to bring this up. So you see here I did a regular stitch length, then I back stitched, and then here I have a longer basting stitch and then back stitching, and then I sew with my regular stitch length the rest of the way. So what we will do first, for this seam allowance here, I just want to clip the seam allowance in those curved corners so that when we turn the pocket right side out, the curves will look nicer. You could also trim away a bit of the seam allowance first, but the most important thing is that you clip the seam allowance. Make sure you don't go too far and cut any of your stitches. Now for this bottom edge, what I want to do is the area here where I have the basting stitches, what you're going to do is you're going to press that open. So I start first with one side and I press that open. Okay, and then you're going to flip it around and you're going to do the same for this side. So you're really just pressing that little area, you're pressing it open. Because I used a thicker interfacing here, it's giving me a little bit of trouble. Okay, and then you're going to want to trim the seam allowance everywhere else. So you're not trimming the seam allowance at all where you have those basting stitches, but you are going to trim the seam allowance everywhere else. So I stop trimming my seam allowance just before I get to those basting stitches. Okay, then you're going to need your seam ripper and you're going to remove those basting stitches, the basting stitches between the back stitching. It's apparently too early in the morning for me today. And it's Monday, so. Okay, so now that this is open, we're going to turn the pocket through that opening. I have a lot of little threads. Now I used black stitching so that hopefully there's enough contrast that you can see it well on the video. And now we're going to press the seam allowance along both the inside curved edge and the outside curved edge. And take your time so that you have nice looking edges. And I find it helps a little bit if you roll that seam allowance in between your fingers and press it a little bit at a time. This is sort of the same technique that I use when I'm doing the openings for my zipper pockets. My iron is not getting very hot. Okay, nearly done this top edge. Okay, and then I'm going to start first with the edge that we left here. So you'll see now, because we have those creases from when we pressed it, from when we pressed that open, it actually fits nicely together. And so I just put them back together and press again. And then I just put a clip to keep those together as they should be. And now I'm just going to finish doing the same thing for the seam allowance along the outside. Just going to roll it in between my fingers and then little threads everywhere. And then press it. Okay, so I'm going to pause the filming and finish pressing my seam allowance. Okay, so I'm done pressing my seam allowance. Now I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm just going to top stitch the seam allowance along this top curved edge. Okay, so now we're going to sew the slip pocket to one of your main body exterior pieces. To do that, we're going to start by marking center. So you're going to fold that main body piece in half, wrong sides together, and you're going to mark the center along the top and the bottom edge. And then you're going to do the same thing for your slip pocket piece. Make sure that you're using a fabric pen or something erasable for the pocket. So you're going to fold it in half. And then you're going to mark the center along the top and the bottom. Okay. So you're going to place the pocket so that all these center marks are aligned. I'm going to take this out for just a minute. And if you have one of these clear rulers, this is the best way to make sure that you're perfectly centered. And then just going to pin the pocket in place. Okay, so that's the center, and then I can also put some clips here along the top. So these open raw edges should be aligned to the top edge of your main body piece. And now we want to make sure that the edges here are straight. So once again, you take your ruler and you just want to make sure that it's an equal distance here, all the way along the edges here. So that looks good. Mine comes out to just a little over 2 1/8 of an inch. Okay, and then just going to pin the rest. And we're going to sew the pocket to the main body piece, and we're only sewing it along this outer edge. Now, if you want to be very precise, it's probably a good idea to measure here along the bottom edge, just to make sure that that distance is also the same. So a little bit of a curve to it. That looks about right. Okay, so I'm going to go sew this in place. So you start at the top here, you backstitch, you sew all along the curved, and when you're sewing along here, don't forget you're going to be sewing these layers shut, the opening here at the bottom, and then all the way here to the top corner here and backstitch. So the outer edge is sewn, and the second thing we want to do is we just want to sew these top edges here of the pocket. We want to sew them to the main body piece so that they don't move around. So I'm going to do that, and you can just use a quick basting stitch with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now the pocket is fully sewn to the main body piece, so I'm just going to set it aside for a minute. And now you're going to need the slip pocket flap pieces. So what we're going to start by doing is pinning them together, right sides together. And you're going to sew them along the outer edge with, this time we're going to change our seam allowance. We're going to sew the outer edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, the two pieces are sewn together, and I'm just going to trim my seam allowance to 1/8 of an inch. Now if you've used fabric, you can flip these so that they are wrong sides together and press the seam allowance. Because I used vinyl, I cannot press it, unfortunately. Yes, I just tossed that on the floor. I always forget to have a trash can near me. So what I'm going to do is I am going to still flip them wrong sides together, obviously. But what I'm going to do, because I used vinyl, I'm going to just roll the seam and then use a clip to hold it. And I do that the entire seam allowance. You can also use the same method for cork. And now, again, because I used vinyl and I did not use fabric, I want my little flap to have a tiny bit more structure. If you used fabric, you have a layer of fleece to give it a little bit more structure. So what I'm going to do instead is, before I do the top stitching, I'm going to take my, so this is stiff stuff. It's like Peltex, but it's a little bit thinner, and you can really like crunch it up and it just comes right back. So what I'm going to do is I want to trim this so that it fits nicely inside and will get caught in the top stitching. So I'm going to trim away about 1/2 inch. Don't worry about being too exact, it's just an estimate. And I want to trim a bit more from this edge here. Apparently I don't cut very straight. Need to trim this corner a bit more. So I just kind of do that until I'm happy with it. Okay, so that should fit. But then I also want to trim just along the top edge because I don't want the stiff stuff to get inside that seam allowance when I sew my top band to this piece. Okay, so that looks good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert it in between the layers. So just by adding those clips for a few minutes, it sort of fixes the seam allowance for you. So you want to insert that and make sure it goes all the way to the very end, right up to the seam, because then when we do the top stitching, we know that the stiff stuff will be caught in that seam allowance and then it won't move. So once again, I'm just adding my clips just so that it holds it in place. And then I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm finally going to do my top stitching. I want to make sure that I get the stiff stuff in the top stitching. So normally I use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, but I might use 1/4 inch just to make sure that I get it sewn really well in that top stitching. Okay, and we don't need to do this top straight edge, you're just doing this curved edge here. Okay, so I top stitched this edge and my piece of stiff stuff was caught in that top stitching. Now you're going to bring back your pocket piece. So we still have the center mark here. So all we need now is a center mark on our little flap piece. And we only need it at the top edge because we want to make sure that it's perfectly centered over the opening of our slip pocket. Okay, so line up that center mark and clip it in place. And then I'm just going to go over to the machine and I'm going to baste the flap to this top edge, and you'll see it covers the opening of our pocket nicely. So just a quick basting stitch here along the top. Okay, one more thing to do and then the front of our bag will be ready. So you'll need one of your top band exterior pieces and you're going to clip it to the top edge, right sides together. And then you're going to sew together along that top edge. And make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. So you're just sewing here along the top through all the layers. Once the top band is sewn to the top edge of the main body, so if you're using fabric, you're going to press the seam allowance and the top band up and away from the pocket. I'm using vinyl, so I can't press it. So I'm just going to go over to the machine and I'll finger press it and kind of pull the layers away from the seam, and then I'll top stitch here along the bottom edge of the top band. Okay, so I've top stitched the bottom edge here of the top band, and we can set aside this panel for now. What we're going to do now is we are going to assemble our exterior zipper pocket on the remaining main body piece. So you should have this piece left over, the one that has the cutout in the fusible fleece on the wrong side. And this should be your exterior zipper facing piece. And what you're going to do is you're going to use your exterior zipper facing pattern piece, and you're going to cut out this shape here along the dash line on the pattern piece. Okay, on the floor. All right, so now you're going to use the shape that you cut out and you're going to draw it on the wrong side of your exterior zipper facing piece. And yes, again, I'm using a regular pen. I don't have fabric pens. I figured out long ago that wherever it doesn't show, you can just use a regular pen. And where it does show, if you actually just do faint lines with a pencil, either white or a regular pencil, you can erase them pretty easily from most fabrics. I probably want to do it on white fabric, of course. Okay, so now we want to make sure this is perfectly centered. So we're going to fold this in half and we're going to mark the center. And we're going to need a center mark along the bottom a little bit later, so I'll just go ahead and do that right now as well. And then I'm also going to fold this in half and put a center line here at the top. Okay, so now we're going to pin this so it's right sides together and these center marks aligned, and you're just going to pin the zipper facing piece to the main body piece. Like so. And now we're going to sew this zipper facing piece to the main body piece. Use a smaller stitch length, so whatever you like as your regular stitch length, and start at one edge here, back stitch. Sew very slowly here because you really want to make sure that you're making a nice curved shape like we've just drawn here. So take your time when you go around the corner and then sew all the way around here and then back stitch again. Okay, so the zipper facing is sewn to the main body piece. And if you did a good job with your cutout in your fleece, it should be pretty much right on the edge of your fleece. And I used black stitching again just so that you can see it well on the video. So we're going to start by cutting away some of this area here in the center of that shape that we just sewed. And then we have some curved corners, so we need to clip a little bit into the seam allowance where we have these curves, and make sure that you're not going too far and cutting into the stitching. Okay, so you see here, just cut some notches here in the corners. I need to let my iron heat up so that we can flip this and press it. So I'm just going to pause and let my iron heat up, and then we're going to press this. Okay, I think my iron is heated up, so we're going to flip this to the wrong side. So now your facing piece and your main body piece, they're going to be wrong sides together, sorry. And I do the same thing. I dampen my fingers and I roll that seam allowance in between my fingers, and then I press, and I do tiny little sections at a time because I really want the opening to my zipper pocket to look really nice. I like these curved corners because I find them to be a little bit more forgiving than the sharp corners at the ends. Usually there's always going to be a little bit of puckering there unless you're really good at clipping. Okay, so I did the wrong side first, and then I just flip it over and I do it again from the right side. Okay, so I'm just going to set this aside for just a minute. And now you're going to need that, either a 9-inch pre-made zipper or your 12 inches of zipper tape. Obviously, I'm using zipper tape. So I'm going to take one of my zipper pocket lining pieces, and I'm going to place my zipper along the top edge. So I want them both right sides facing up. So the lining piece and the zipper should be right sides facing up. And then I'm just going to use a couple of clips to hold the zipper in place on the lining piece. Okay, and now I'm going to sew them together with 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way along the top edge. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so the zipper is attached to the lining piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press the lining piece away from the zipper. So now this is still right side facing up, but in this view here, your zipper is actually wrong side facing up. Okay, and now we're going to repeat the same step, and we're going to attach the remaining edge of your zipper to the top edge of your remaining lining piece. And we're doing exactly the same thing. We're clipping it to hold it in place, and then you go over to your machine and you sew it to the lining piece along the top edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you backstitch at the beginning and the end. The second piece is now attached to the other side of the zipper, and we're doing exactly the same thing again, and we're pressing that lining piece away from the zipper. So in this view, zipper is wrong side facing up, and both of your lining pieces are right side facing up. Okay, we want to leave them opened this way. Okay, so place them, and I'm just going to move this out of the way to make the surface a bit more flat. So put them on your work surface. I want the lining pieces right side facing down and your zipper right side facing up. And then you're going to take this exterior piece. You might have to pull your zipper pull to the center a little. And you want to place this on top like this. And you want these edges of your zipper facing to be lined up with the top edge of your zipper, like so. So I'm going to start with this side. And you also want these outer edges of your zipper facing to be lined up with the outer edges of your zipper pocket lining pieces. Just going to pin that one first, and then I'm doing the same thing on the opposite end. And I'm going to pin that in place. being very naughty. Okay, and then you want to make sure that this comes up high enough so that there should just be like a gap of 1/8 of an inch here between your zipper coil and the top edge here of your zipper pocket opening. You're just going to pin that in place as well. So it's really important that you don't want to see this edge here. So you want that to lay flat and to be hidden. I'm going to move my pole out of the way here. And now we're going to go over to the machine, and we're going to be sewing the zipper and through the zipper pocket facing and a little bit of the lining pieces. And you're going to top stitch this seam allowance here along the opening of your zipper. And again, pay attention and make sure that your zipper is lying flat and that the exposed edge of your zipper is hidden inside this seam allowance. You want to maintain an even amount of space between the edge of your zipper coil and this edge of your opening. And so you do it here, all the way here, and then make sure you're back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, so this is sewn in place now. Unfortunately, I didn't use contrasting stitching, but hopefully you can see that I've sewn all the way around. So now all I want to do is I just want to do a quick basting stitch here along the top edge of the zipper, just to kind of sew the zipper to this pressed edge of your zipper pocket lining piece. So you just really want to baste from here to here. Okay, so now we want to have the zipper pocket lining pieces right side facing up, and you're going to take the top piece and you're going to fold it down so that it's folded all the way down, and you're just going to fold it here along that top edge of the zipper like so, and then you're just going to use some clips to hold the sides together. And then I want you to use pins to mark the bottom edge. So they're not the same, they don't meet perfectly at the bottom here, and that's totally fine. You haven't done anything wrong. We're just going to use pins to mark where we need to sew them together to close the bottom of our zipper pocket. You're still going to need to take the pins out of the way as you're sewing, but they're there to mark where the bottom edges are. Okay? So now you're going to flip this like this, and you're going to start at the top here, back stitch, sew all the way down, and then when you just get beneath those pins, you're going to stop and rotate, move the main body piece out of the way again, take your pins out as you're sewing and sew them together along the bottom edge, and then when you get to the opposite side, you're going to rotate again and sew upwards, and you're going to back stitch. And that should close up your pocket. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm using black thread, so you'll be able to see the stitching when I'm done. Okay, hopefully you can see that black stitching. And all I'm going to do is just trim a little bit of the excess zipper pocket lining here. Okay, and then the last thing we need to do is sew the top band to this second main body piece, and we're doing it exactly the same way. It's just that this time we have a zipper pocket here, and because it is a handbag size zipper, we can use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance when sewing our top band. So just make sure when you're clipping along the zipper that you're flattening that zipper. You'll have to move your zipper pull out of the way as you're sewing so that it doesn't interfere with the seam allowance. Okay, so I'm just going to, again, you're doing the same thing as you did previously. You're sewing from one end to the other with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you're back stitching at the beginning and the end. The top band is sewn to the main body piece, and again, if you're using fabric, you press the seam allowance and the top band away from the main body, and then you top stitch along the bottom edge, And if you're using cork or vinyl like I am, you can't press, so you're going to finger press and kind of slightly tug and do your top stitching. Okay, so the top stitching is done. Now we're going to, first we're going to start by adding our center marks. So if you'll remember, we made some center marks here on the right side of our main body panels, and I just want to transfer those to the wrong side. Okay, for your main body pieces. And then you're going to use the pattern piece to do the exterior bottom. So you should have a little mark here along the curved edge. That's your center marks along the curved edge. And then you can actually use the fold line for your center marks along the straight edge, top and bottom. Okay, I'm going to set the bottom aside for a minute, and we're going to sew the two main body pieces together along both sides. It's fairly easy to do. The most important thing is that you line up the bottom edges of your two top bands. You want those to be nicely aligned. It'll just make the side of your bag look a lot nicer if those are aligned. So I usually clip those first and then I clip the rest. So we're clipping these right sides together. And I'm going to do the second side right away instead of coming back and explaining the same thing for the second side. Okay, so again, I'm making sure that the bottom edges of my top bands are aligned, and I clip those first. And then I do the rest. Okay, so we're going to sew both of these sides together. You're going to back stitch at the beginning and the end. So you're going to have the top edge here is going to remain open and unsewn, and so is the bottom edge. Okay, so these are sewn together, and now we have some sort of a large tube. Now we're going to attach the bottom to the bottom edges of the bag where we have our center marks transferred to the wrong side. And you start by clipping the center marks always. Then you know your bag won't be askew. Okay, and your side seams that you've just sewn, those are your center marks as well. And apparently I'm having a very difficult time opening up this seam. You can actually press that open to make it a little bit easier. Sometimes I'll press it open and then I'll just do a quick basting stitch to make sure the seam allowance stays open. Okay, and then I do it here as well. So I like this type of bottom because it's not quite round, which can sometimes be quite difficult to sew. I guess it's an oblong shape. Now, once we've done the center marks, we can clip everything else in between. Now, if you're finding it to be a little bit of a tight fit around the corner, when I sew the bottom on, I usually sew it this way facing up. And if I find that this here is having a hard time sitting nice and flat, you can actually do little clips here around the curved part, and you'll find that it'll sit nice and flat for sewing. Just make sure that if you do cut little notches, that you make them a maximum of 1/4 inch, because you don't want them to appear in your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so you can actually do that for each of the 4 curved corners if you're finding that it's not laying very flat for you. I usually try to sew it first, and I keep my scissors with me at the machine, and if I see that the clips are needed, then I go ahead and I cut a few notches in there. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to the machine, and like I said, I sew usually with the bottom on the bed of my machine. That way there, if I do need to clip a few notches in that seam allowance, it's a lot easier for me to do it. And you're sewing with your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you want to make sure that it's extra sturdy seam, you can actually sew a second time. Once you've done the initial seam, you can actually sew a second time, and I usually do them very close together, and it just makes it extra strong. Okay, so I'm going to go over and sew the bottom. Okay, so the bottom is sewn on, and I don't know if you could see, but I did do 2 lines of stitching. And now I'm just going to trim away a little bit of the seam allowance before I turn my bag right side out. Okay, now I'm going to turn the bag, sit out. And the last thing we're going to do in this video is we're going to get our rectangle ring straps ready. I just want to turn the bag all the way so you can see what it looks like so far. Okay, so here we have the back, and here we have the front. It's a bit big, so hopefully you can see the whole thing on the camera. Okay, now I'm just going to put it aside for just 1 second. And again, I need to heat up an iron, so I'm going to pause and turn it on. Okay, so we have our rectangle ring connectors. The first thing we want to do is draw a line along the center on the wrong side of both. So since it's 3 inches, that's about 1.5 inch from either side. And then we are going to press in each half towards that center line, wrong sides together. And you're going to do that for both of them. I use my medium weight so it doesn't stay flat as nicely as a lightweight woven, but I like to use the medium weight for straps just to make them a little bit thicker and sturdier. Do the same for the second piece. And now I'm going to go over to the machine, and I'm going to sew along the outer edges. So in the pattern, I just said to sew 1 line on either side, 1/8 of an inch, but I'm actually going to do 2. So I'm going to do one at 1/8 of an inch and another one at 3/8 of an inch, and I'll do that on both sides for both pieces. Okay, so I've sewn these, and I used a coordinating thread. I didn't want to use a contrasting thread, so you probably can't really see these very well. You're going to take your rectangle ring and you're going to slip 1 through each of the rectangle ring straps, and then I'm just going to go over to the machine, and I'm quickly going to baste the raw edges of the straps together so that they don't open and we lose our rectangle rings. So I'm just going to do a quick basting stitch along the top where the raw edges are for each one. Okay, so in the next step I'm going to have you baste these to the bag. So one little tip is when you're doing your basting stitches here, do them at 1/4 inch seam allowance, because we're going to be placing these 1/4 inch of the strap above the top edge of the bag. So it kind of makes it easier for you to know. And you want it to be centered, so you know that center line where your fabric meets here at the center. That's what you want to have aligned with this middle seam. And then you want the basting stitches to be aligned with the top edge of the bag. And you're just going to baste those in place. You do one on one side, and then you attach the other one to the second side. And that's it for this video. In the next one, we're going to sew up our lining.